Hey everybody, Nevin Gusak, your host of the Populist Patriot, another live stream. Now, some of the tankies, these hardline communists that I listen to, because I got to monitor what our political opponents say. And look, communists are going to be my enemy. They're not my friends. They're going to want to eventually eviscerate and totally destroy and kill people like me, who think like us. That's the bottom line. But we have to know what they say. We have to know what they think. And I monitor them. I monitor what Haas of Infrared, for example, Jackson Hinkle a little bit, Caleb Maupin, and other very hard left sources, as well as also neo-fascist individuals too, as well. Zoltanius and others. At the end of the day, we may have surface critiques of the structure of untrammeled political and economic liberalism, but our ends are still, in my opinion, our ends and our ultimate goals are very different. And that's just the way it is. That's how it goes. It is what it is. So Haas, amongst others, mentioned this British leftist. He has been very anti-Chinese Communist Party. He's been very much against Putin's Russian Federation. His name is Paul Mason, and he has a column on in the New Statesman, which is a British left publication. And Paul Mason, he seems to be more of a social democrat than anything else. He's really not a hardcore socialist. Economically, he's kind of old school British laborite. With a lot of social democratic overlays. He's really not like hardcore far left. He's not like the British tankies, like the Communist Party of Great Britain, Marxist Leninist. He's not like that. He's kind of more in the tradition of Clement Attlee and Franklin Roosevelt more than anything else, maybe a little more leftward. But he is an opponent of Russia and China. And he had a very good article called in the New Statesman, What Does Victory Look Like in Ukraine? Dated April 27th, 2022. And I'm going to read you an excerpt because I think it really illustrates the problem of how Anglo-American neoliberal market fundamentalism has put the United States and Great Britain, especially Great Britain, the United States, at a growing strategic disadvantage, and at how those ideas of market fundamentalism and homo economicus has really pervaded even our political class to the detriment of our national security. Paul Mason wrote, the sanctions against Russia, though fast enough to grab half of Russia's foreign exchange reserves, were not strong enough to paralyze its economy because much of Europe had got itself into acute energy dependence on Russian oil and gas. Well, I thought free trade was supposed to end all wars and aggressions and, bring peace and liberalization to authoritarian revisionist powers. Guess not. As a result, even as its soldiers rape, torture, and execute Ukraine's civilians, the West continues shoveling dollars into Vladimir Putin's bank account through oil and gas payments. There has, in short, been an acute absence of the kind of strategic thinking shown by Western leaders in the last big global showdown. Though he declared a Zeitenwende, or sea change in German policy, Chancellor Olaf Scholz has found it difficult to persuade his party or himself that selling heavy weapons to Ukraine won't trigger nuclear retaliation before finally committing to send anti-aircraft tanks. Boris Johnson, though he readily shipped weaponry to Ukraine, runs a cabinet and a party still enmeshed in Russian financial influence. Joe Biden, the trade unionist, asked out loud how the West could allow Putin to stay in power Joe Biden, the president, walked the idea of regime change back a few hours later. The West, in short, has been dragged into a conflict it did not prepare for. It has been dragged from crisis management into heavy and continuous supplies of heavy arms and ammunition. It has moved from the assumption that Ukraine would be occupied to the assumption that Ukraine can win. But it is still unable to answer the question that the giants of the 1940s knew was obvious and which they engaged with even as their backs were to the wall. What does winning look like in Ukraine? And what do we need to do to bring stability rather than chaos to a post-ceasefire Black Sea region? In part, this failure is due to the way free market capitalism has eviscerated strategic thinking amongst the West's political elite. The defense analyst James Scher at the Estonian think tank ICDS complains, what used to be great departments of state are now dominated by policy managers rather than strategic thinkers. The only influential figures to buck the trend, he said, are the celebrated realists who have urged the West to consign Ukraine to Vladimir Putin's sphere of influence. Scher offers no explanation for how this came about, but longtime critics of neoliberalism know the answer. As Goldsmith's economist Will Davies puts it, neoliberalism is, quote, the disenchantment of politics by economics. There you go. There you go. Homo economicus. The idea that if you have free trade and deregulation and all the rest of it, and everybody trades and invests with everyone, everything's going to be wonderful. So everything's going to be wonderful. But the reality is, in the big, wide world of geopolitics and friends and enemies and neutrals as nations and governments, Homo economicus doesn't exist. Free market economics and the whole market fundamentalist that open markets are going to solve all the world's problems, it's just not reality. It's just not reality. Because what market fundamentalism has given us is self-serving careerists, self-serving political elites, what Chuck Harder would refer to as the I've Got Mine Club. Everything's about me, and my advancement, and me, and my advancement, and everything else. That's what it comes down to. That's what it comes down to. Because market fundamentalism doesn't produce great leaders. Because all market fundamentalism is all about Thatcherism and Reaganism and Clintonism and New Labor to some degree. All it's about is just counting pennies in the Bank of London or the Federal Reserve or Wall Street. It's all it's about. It's about penny pinching. It's about penny pinching and social Darwinism, which undermines the very notion of a united people in the face of a common enemy, or a united people in the face of building things and building a better future for our peoples. This is what the culture of Milton Friedmanism has given us. It has given us this atomistic, overly selfish, individualistic culture which has pervaded all our institutions. With his ideology that free trade and free markets and open markets can conquer any authoritarian government and make them play nice in the sandbox. And that's not the case. That's not the case. For decades, we thought that the Soviet Union fell, the Cold War was over. No. The Soviet Union repositioned its assets in the Communist Party Soviet Union. They privatized their assets, called themselves different names. And now all of a sudden, we wonder why that Russia is on the march. Is on the march globally. It's on the march militarily, in the sense of military buildup. And we wonder why. I thought Reagan and Thatcher, well, Reagan brought down the Soviet Union. No, they just went into a controlled cold sleep. What Yuri Arbatov and other Soviet ideologists of the late 1980s and into the early 1990s referred to getting rid of the enemy image. And now the chickens are coming home to roost. And then we thought, well, there would be the end of history, as Francis Fukuyama famously put it. Well, no. As Russia did not cease its Soviet oriented culture and ideology. As the Russian government, the Russian economic institutions, the large ones, that at least the monopolistic ones, the Russian armed forces, the Russian intelligence services like the FSB and the SVR, they didn't cease their Soviet mentality. They still were committed to a weakening of the United States. And this is something that analysts like J.R. Nyquist has pointed out time and time and again for at least 20 something years. And it's about time policymakers listen to people like him. If I was President Trump, I would have brought J.R. Nyquist in as one of my chief national security advisors. Instead of having this cockamamie hair-brained idea of trying to separate Russia and China, which we tried during the middle and latter part of the Cold War, and it ended up shooting us ourselves and ended up in a situation where we are shooting ourselves in the foot. So I think Paul Mason, columnist for the New Statesman, I think he has it 100% right. Because even if we try to have a sound strategic policy, we can't. Because American corporations, British corporations, a variety of the companies have continued to trade high technology and import Russian commodities, of which we're partially dependent on. And Europe is very dependent on. Take Germany, for example. So now this is not going to require market fundamentalism to get it out. It's going to require a combination of, yes, a heavy amount of free enterprise, but a heavy amount of state planning and state intervention, meaning a crash program in Germany to rebuild the nuclear power plants, to become dependent on coal, Britain, extracting more oil from the North Sea regions, if there's any left. I mean, any experts out there can correct me on that, as well as also Britain building nuclear power plants, with Boris Johnson had talked about. But Boris Johnson isn't a part of he's a committed anti-statist in many ways, at least in his road to the prime minister. He's an ardent Thatcherite. And unfortunately, the British Conservative Party is contaminated by Thatcherite globalist free market ideology. And all the conservative parties, the supposed anti-socialists and supposed anti-communists, need to have a serious conversation about things like this. We need to pay more attention to the wise words of Paul Mason in this point. And the right needs to liberate itself from free market ideology. It's the bottom line. Because it would be the West and the United States would have an easier time standing up and preparing ourselves against the war planning of the Russians and the Chinese, and a better job in protecting and ensuring the independence of our Western European and Asian allies if we didn't import Russian oil, if we didn't import natural gas and petroleum products from the Russians, if we didn't import steel and certain important metals from the Russians. We wouldn't be in this position, and we would not allow American corporations to depend on the Russian market to make money. From exporting microchips and computers and other items critical for the Russian arms industry, as I talked about in my previous live stream. So I think in conclusion, I would like to see a united front develop between the Paul Masons in Britain, the Julius Kreins of American affairs, all these people who are opponents of neoliberalism without openly embracing the solutions as propounded by the tankies or neo-fascists or neo-Nazis, and ones that consider Russia and China an actual threat. And those are the kinds of alliances I would like to see start to come together. And I hope maybe this show will grow. We're already at 598 subscribers. We've been going up slowly. I hope to hit the 600 mark and exceed that mark. And yes, I'm kind of busy, but I'm also planning articles and papers for a Substack newsletter that I will be developing. I know I've been talking about that before, but I do have a life. I got a daughter, I got a girlfriend, I got a lot of activities and whatnot. I got my health to maintain. I'm an exercise fanatic, paddleboarding, yoga, all that stuff. I got to keep up with that. And I got to keep up with providing different live streams and interviews for you, the viewers, too, as well, to keep you interested in the program as well. But that Substack will be coming online hopefully soon. It is going to be a subscription base because, I'm going to be putting a lot of work into it and a lot of time and a lot of research, continuous research. And I'm not going to make it that expensive. It's probably going to be for monthly $5, maybe for a year like $20 or something or another. I'll come up with some prices. I mean, feel free to suggest some subscription prices. If you guys have any suggestions on that, I'll do that. But it's a labor of love, but we have to be realistic. And I don't like to ask money for my YouTube channel, but for a Substack where I'm really putting labor, I mean, yes, I put labor here, but for a Substack article, and if you've looked at my writings, I tend to be very detail oriented and it puts a lot of research and skill in there. Yeah, I'm going to ask for some money, but I'm not going to make it prohibitively expensive or anything like that. So anyways, enough about my Substack. Let me conclude this live stream. Be sure to follow the works of Paul Mason on the New Statesman. He's had some very interesting articles. He's a man of the moderate social democratic left, sometimes a little far left, but yet he's not like the tankies where he's openly a Marxist-Leninist fanatic. So that's good news. I like to see the people like the Paul Masons, the Jaron Nyquists, the Nevin Gussacks, the Cliff Kincaids, and others, kind of Tina Trent's, uniting the dissident or quasi-dissident elements of the conservative types, uniting with some of the patriotic-oriented leftists or populist leftists who are not tankies or are anti-tanky. So I would like to see that more happen. I hope my program will maybe in the future be a forum for such alliances. Thank you all, and we'll be having some more live streams.